So any questions for Joy also? Yeah?
It's very difficult catching them. So better you ask whatever you have to now.
Just like while we are reading about these environment movements, just struck my mind कि why don't we have environment movements like big scale or movement that can impact policies in an urban area? Like for example, if we talk about Delhi, we know how much we are dependent on water. Like we are dependent on other states for water. Still, when a wetland is getting constructed, or there is a much of hue and cry about it, but in terms of movement, like in our rural area, either there is no there's a shortage in literature, or there is no kind of movement that we need, which we may need in urban areas. Like urban centers are largely dependent on others for resources.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the let's say the numbers and or the intensity or the scale of movements that one sees in at least some rural areas, you don't see that much in urban areas. Even the search for alternatives, we find it's much harder to find them in urban areas than in rural areas. And I can think of 2-3 possible reasons. This is speculation because I don't know if anybody's really studied this in detail. One is that there is a distance. There's a distance between you and say the natural resources that you depend on. So there isn't an immediate feedback, which is the case in a lot of rural areas, that if you destroy your forest, there's immediately going to be an impact on you yourself. Or if you destroy your own local water source, then where else will you get water from? In our case, in cities, we are getting stuff from so far away, or they're really invisible. We don't even know where most of our stuff comes from. So if there is a negative impact somewhere, we don't really feel it, at least not immediately. And governance is such that if we are negatively impacted, there will be another source from where our thing will come. Of course, if the Jats stop 70% of Delhi's water, I don't think you're going to get water from anywhere else. That's a separate issue, but that's a huge scale. But normally, suppose one source from somewhere, let's say a mining area is stopped somewhere, and for a little while, a little bit of the granite does not come into the city, they'll mine somewhere else and give it for us. That's the way power is, no? Power is meant for people like us. So one is the distance from, or the lack of feedback loops, ecological feedback loops and part of that also is just lack of knowledge of what are the impacts of our lifestyles are. The second thing is that cities are far more, they're not stable residential populations very often. People are coming and going, neighborhoods are changing. So you don't, the sense of community that you might need in order to have a collective movement is more difficult than in a rural area. That's the second possible. Third, which is maybe linked to the first one, is that anyway you have the power to get what you want. So, or the issue is so decentralized that you don't actually think, like pollution, you don't think that a collective movement, unlike let's say if tomorrow a nuclear power station was to come up in Delhi, I'm sure there would be a substantial number of citizens getting together. It's one location, one whatever. But pollution is so dispersed and so many different things, you don't really get that kind of collective feeling of trying to do something, which is strange if you were to think of it, because 1/3 of Delhi's children are affected by pollution, and yet we don't actually see a mass movement in Delhi. If EAP had not come in, even this even odd probably would not have happened. So these are some reasons I can think of. I don't know, but as I said, partly speculation. I don't know whether other seniors here might want to add something.
We have the entire 2 years with them. So
Okay. Okay. But we certainly need much more urban mobilization on all these issues. And also, very rightly said, also on issues of how cities are impacting villages. That's getting away from the narrow environmentalism and beginning to look at an environmentalism in which issues of equity and poverty and injustice also get built in. So how the city is a parasite on the village and how we are dumping all our wastes into surrounding. That needs to be part of the mobilization also. So it's not just about how to make the city itself cleaner or better to live in.
Maybe not mentioning Salem and Bangalore's
Yes.
wetland example.
We actually have two other members of Cultivate here. Sujata has been a long-standing member, and Srishti has just joined us. So the example she was just mentioning is from Salem in Salem town in Tamil Nadu, and actually Bangalore also in Karnataka, where residents have got together, and this is middle class, upper class residents who actually almost never mobilize themselves on anything. Who've got together to actually revive a number of lakes which had got drained out or badly polluted or just dumped on. And at least the example I've seen in Bangalore, Kaikundrali is actually a fantastic example of the revival, complete revival of a lake where wildlife has come back and now the whole area is used for running, jogging, civic activities, etc., etc. So these are very interesting examples. Salem I don't know so well, but it's a similar kind of thing, and where, in fact, if I is that correct, that all the funding for it was done by crowdsourcing. They
No
just
corporate funding at
no
all.
corporate funding, no government funding. It
All
was just-
voluntary contributions from citizens.
So that's quite interesting. There's a bit of rich poor politics also built into it in Bangalore, which is part of the problematic part of it. But at least in terms of seeing how people can mobilize themselves to recreate a natural, relatively natural environment around them, it's very interesting examples.
Just to add to what Ashish said and taking her question, I think there are small sporadic examples where it may not be large scale mobilization and movements as such, but there are some interesting examples. Now, even taking the Bangalore thing, there is this whole colony called the Rainbow type of thing, who are completely dealing from the Bangalore municipal supply. It is supposed to be, I mean, it's a little upper class society and things, we have visited and things, but they are completely managing with local water resources. What are the water they can harvest through the rooftop water harvesting and the watershed and other type of thing, completely recycling the whole water, and there is no private borewells or wells, it's all completely common, and still the Residents Welfare Association has been able to supply more than 200 liters of water per person per day type of thing. So there are systems where people are trying to work out sustainable solutions and things. But I would say that instead of having movements in the urban, I think the urban population seems to be going the other way around. Now, in the case of water, as I said, most of the cities are dependent on water from outside. Now, in Bangalore, I think has gone for the Kaveri fourth phase, where the water is coming from 100 or 120 kilometers away. A place like Mumbai is also dependent mostly on this. Now, there are about 8 to 10 dams which are now being planned in the tribal hinterland to supply water to this. But there is not a single movement which is questioning this. The moment, for example, there is a severe drought in Maharashtra today, and Pune is blessed with water. I think we are one of the better places in terms of per capita accessibility, 170, and maybe a little lesser than the Lithuanian Delhi, for example, but Pune has. Now, downstream people have been demanding that many of the dams have been designed partly for irrigation purposes, and they have been demanding that part of the water need to be released for agriculture. There's a resistance all across the Pune city. Nobody will say that we can manage with less water and things. So I would find there is no civil society movement to saying that okay, in Pune we should do recycling, we should do local water harvesting, integrate groundwater and other type of resources so that the whole demand for exogenous water can be less. So unless we come with certain conditions saying that the city need to first make a case, after finishing or exhausting all local options, only then probably they can demand for fresh water from outside. Unless these type of conditions come from above, I don't think today the urban population is in a mindset to say that we can do with less water, please don't get water from outside, impacting on the livelihoods of farmers and type of a thing. So there is a disconnect between, nothing much happening that scale in the cities, questioning this whole, dependence on exogenous sources, for example, or treatment and other type of things.
I
have three questions actually, and they're linked questions, so I'll address them to both the speakers.
Yeah.
The first question is, so you're talking about direct democracy. How do we apply direct democracy in, say, the case of the Kaveri, the water struggles between, say, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, where every group wants water for their own uses and for justifiable uses, but it's spread out across a large area when people are not culturally linked? That's my first question. Second question is, what do both of you feel? So you mentioned in passing water trading rights and the Darling Basin in Australia. What is your response to the claim that producing certain kinds of goods in certain areas is environmentally better than in other areas, and therefore a good argument for free trade according to the market? And the third question is a theoretical question, but I still feel it's relevant. What do we do about the existence of power structures? For example, certain kinds of technologies require us to invest in that. So supposing we chose not to follow a path of high industrialization or high militarization, other forces in the continent might sweep in and take our resources and anyway develop them, and that would be even more hierarchical. So what do we do about the real existence of power structures?
My initial this was about this direct democracy and about this Kaveri conflict and what you do at that scale and things. I think there are two ways of, there are 2-3 things people have tried out one could approach that. Now, one is that, I don't know, some of you might have heard about this initiative called Kaveri Family, which is set up by a friend of ours called Professor Janagarajan from Madras Institute of Development Studies. When this whole conflict came up and too much of violence came up, they took an initiative to bring farmers from both, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu for a dialogue. In fact, if you read some of Janagarajan's writings, the first meeting was like, farmers are going at loggerheads, trying to attack each other and things. But they had, the farmers from Tamil Nadu, especially the delta region of Kaveri, visiting the upstream areas in Karnataka and seeing the agriculture and that type of things. And they're coming here. That led to a whole lot of interesting exchange of experiences and try to see what each others are trying to do. In fact, that whole process went for about 3 to 4 years. I've been also lucky to meet some of them. And it's very interesting if you talk to those farmers today, the type of information base they have and the type of empathetic relationship between the two is mind-boggling. Now the issue is that after this whole Kaveri family started, you can find even after the Kaveri tribunal gave the verdict, which Karnataka people apparently felt that it is not just to them and that Tamil Nadu has been favoured, you don't find much violence reported, I think, because that is why we were able to do that. Now, unfortunately, this whole process of Kaveri family could not lead to a settlement. In fact, they also came up with a water sharing arrangement between the farmers, trying to understand things. But the way issue is that unless you have legal institutional space for farmers or other type of stakeholder groups to come and put forward their viewpoints, the whole formal legal person in India is that is to the tribunal, and these voices never get reflected. Now the tribunals have a very totally different type of a verdict. And interestingly, though, according to the tribunal's legal position, Supreme Court cannot actually entertain that any cases coming from the tribunal verdicts. Only the concerned states can approach the tribunal for a review of the whole thing. First, Karnataka went into Supreme Court, Tamil Nadu went later, Kerala, which has got some 30 TMC of water, they don't know what to do with that water, they also went into the court, and I think Pondicherry also into the case. Now the whole case is back into Supreme Court after 20 or 25 years of processes like this. Now the whole issue is that if we can build in, some of the Western countries have tried, like multi-stakeholder processes, where people with the different interest groups are brought together at the basin or sub-basin scale, their things are through a negotiation and type of thing, and the decision they take gets legally has a place in that. So unless we change some of these legal institutions, some of these processes, which at least very grassroots, very interesting things, but never get into a type of a thing. Second issue, I think we need to look at the institutional process of decision making and governance at the scale. This. We are saying that, okay, the decision which can be taken at, let's say, micro watershed scale can be much more directly done, because we are talking about 300 households or 400 households which are depending on that micro watershed. You can have a delegated democracy or a nested institutional framework where you build in institutions from below. Today we also talk about river basin organizations which are very bureaucratic place, which is top-down type of model. All the departmental heads and secretaries are members of the river basin organizations, which are, that is the way the concept is taking place. Instead of that, how can you make a much more democratic space where different stakeholders can come together, negotiate and come to type of. So this is a long way to go. This can be done. That is
I'll
one.
just
Yeah.
add to that, and then Joy,
Yeah.
you can come back to
Yeah,
the other
yeah.
questions. Is two other things quickly, building on what Joy said. One is these conflicts are also based on a current model of water use, or let's say agriculture and home household use and things like that, which, as we've been talking about, is extremely wasteful. So, for instance, with agriculture, it's assumed that agricultural development means more irrigation. And if you are doing dry land farming, you're backward, you need to actually be in irrigated, you need to do irrigated farming. That model also needs to be questioned. So, for instance, again, going back to the Deccan Development Society women, they are saying that why we don't need this kind of large scale irrigation. We are actually quite happy with even the rainfall, and this very low rainfall area, incidentally, that even with that rainfall, we can actually produce enough for ourselves, plus put something into the market. So, if one gets into, so this is why it's really crucial that answers and solutions are not looked at sectorally. We actually start looking across sectors. And this is one big problem with the current governance model. Every department has its own focus, and they're not talking to another department about the interrelationship, say in this case between agriculture and water departments, right? Which is such a clear thing. But also, for instance, a lot of the Kaveri water would be for feeding the cities in that area, and as we know, cities are enormous guzzlers of water, completely unnecessary guzzlers of water, like even how much we flush down our toilets every day, as an example. And the second thing I'd add here is that this model of direct democracy would also then begin to challenge current political boundaries of decision making. Now, in today's time and age, it's a sensitive topic. But let's say, for instance, decision making currently, let's say in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka and so on, is happening. First of all, there's a state boundary in middle, which is creating this. Secondly, even that the river basin is cut across by political constituencies which are not according to the basin. They're much larger or
ideological or
correct. So the model that actually happened in Rajasthan for about 10 years and worked very interestingly, where the Tarun Bharat Sangh organization created something called the Arvari Sansad, which is one whole river basin of 400 square kilometers became a decision making unit. So 65 villages in that river basin made a parliament of their own, and all decision making with regard to that river basin was done by these 65 villages together. It's becoming very weak right now for various other reasons. For 10 years it actually ran very well. So that gives us a model of a different decision making process where the political boundaries are based on ecological and cultural contiguities and so on. Unlike what we have right now in very many cases where ecology and culture is actually not necessarily taken into account. You take that model into South Asia as a whole, it's very clear. You take it globally, it's even clearer. So that gets into questions of what's nationalism, but anyway, we won't go there right now.
Yeah, I think the second issue which you had, I think is also an important issue, that there are certain areas maybe, agroecologically or something more suitable to produce certain type of goods and services or products and things, and how do you exchange this and things. I would say that yes, but I think what we are talking about is that both in terms of, I think there is a concept of self-sufficiency, where we are saying that, like Ashish said, may not be a village or a micro watershed, but maybe a couple of villages or a certain region or a sub-basin or something can we not work towards more self-sufficient type of things. Now here we are saying that some of the basic things like food, fodder, fuel and other type of thing, can we not create that type of a self-sufficient communities to some extent, and I think it's possible. It may not be as a micro unit like a village or something, but taking a sub-basin at least, I think that is possible to do. But I think beyond also we need to move something called a self-reliant type of communities. I think I do make a distinction between self-sufficiency and self-reliance, where you can also do equal exchanges, both in terms of monetary as well as in terms of energy terms, where you exchange type of a thing. Otherwise, the argument today in Maharashtra for sugarcane cultivation is the same. It is said that agroclimatically sugarcane is one of the best places to cultivate sugarcane, because the sugar recovery is much higher as compared to UP and other places because of the sunshine and various other type of thing. Now the issue is that today, though Maharashtra has the highest number of large and medium dams, today the irrigated area is about 16% or 17% of the gross cultivated area. Now why is this? Where the all India average something about 30 or 35% is irrigated land, because 70 to 80% of the water is today monopolized by sugarcane cultivation. Now the same argument is the same, because Maharashtra is supposed to be a better place for sugarcane and sugar recovery and other type of thing. So I think there is a limit to some of these things, that we can build up the same thing in a very different manner, when you go from what type of things are we looking at for self-sufficiency? Beyond that, how do you bring in increasing levels of self-reliance to some extent?
Yeah.
And how do you build in equal exchanges?
Yeah.
So we don't say that there are no exchanges involved.
Yeah.
Ashish, you want to-
Yeah, no, I think that's basically. I mean, I think the crucial thing here is that why should I be dependent on somebody very far away for my basic needs? When in a world, especially where that there is no security of that long-term exchange. So that's the thing. All the economies that have gone into export-led models have suffered as a result of this.
Same.
All the economies that have got connected up to the global economy have suffered that after 2008 crash and will keep suffering. There are going to be worse crashes of that kind coming. So the US sneezes and we get a cold. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. So globalization is fundamentally flawed from that perspective, which does not mean we don't have global relations anymore. You continue having, in fact, global relations are crucial. But they would be more of this kind, the more equal exchange, building on or going beyond basic needs, and also, of course, cultural exchanges and things like that.
And your last point is also, I mean, this is the whole question, larger powers and type of thing, then how do you deal with that when you talk about this? I mean, yes, I think that's an issue in terms of international relations and powers and type of thing. In fact, if you look at this whole dam building in the northeast, one of the arguments which is being put forward for the India's efforts to build as many storages and structures on Brahmaputra and distributaries is that there's a larger power called China sitting there, and there are already either rumors or something happening saying that China is trying to divert near that, what is that, Great Nuke or something, the water to the drought-prone regions of China and things. Now, we really don't know how far is it true, how far it's not true, because there's not too much of transparency in terms of information flow and things. But the issue is that even if Indian state saying that, okay, is some of the, what you call the first user principle. In some of the international type of thing, there is in the water sector that, first user principle does stand, because that gets a right and that has to be respected in terms of any further agreements and things. But we all know that if China is really doing whatever storages and structures we build, I don't know that is going to matter to, because you can't, because there are geopolitics and many of the water conflicts are not only about water per se, there are a whole lot of other things come into, and geopolitics is one of the things. So, but then building up our own resources, our own storages and destructive dams is not the answer to do that. That has to be dealt at a much larger political level to leverage that.
Yeah, one will have to look at global governance also.
Yeah.
Of course. And none of these things will work in isolation. You have to look at all of these. And that makes it that much more difficult. But we don't have any other options but to actually go for those. So, for instance, even global governance right now is, let's say, on paper is United Nations, which is basically nation states that are deciding what happens at a global level. It's not people as such. Now, in theory, we are the one who elected the Indian government, which in theory is going to represent us fairly in the United Nations or WTO or whatever, but we know that that doesn't necessarily happen. So there's growing demand from communities, especially indigenous peoples of the world, that we want our own representation at a global level of decision making. We don't want to go through Bolivia or India or whatever it is. So there's now, for instance, people talk about People's Assembly, Global People's Assembly. I can say, if you're really interested, there's a number of papers on this which are very interesting. People have shown what possibilities there are. How do you move towards that, of course, is a more difficult thing. You need a much greater mobilization at a global level of people's movements to actually get to something like that. That would then help to challenge global military inequalities or other sorts of inequalities. But
So
not easily.
Some of the papers.
I'll send you. I'll give you my email and you send me your email. I'll send you. Richard Falk, for instance, has written on Global People's Assembly. FALK is an American political scientist. But there are others also.
So I was just thinking, like you have given various examples of how the examples that the people have been successful in creating an environment or a commune or a social where they are self-sufficient, they are able to deal on their own, all the things that they do. But a situation, for example, if we talk about city, where the resource is not sufficient and where it is necessary, which we say, like, means they say as resource allocation, like, bringing some resource from some part and, they like to call that. So, in that what do you propose? As in,
Dress as a classroom.
because it is easier and simpler in a community where we have people, but in places in city there are not people but masses. So to create that sense of a commune, so that they can behave in a particular manner, how? Because when you are giving an example of these villages and these people, it is a sort of a solution. So I am just curious if we think about it, because when I think of a solution, I don't see anything except that the way I will be practicing my living. So, but since we are talking about urban life, so in that case, what do you propose then?
Yeah, I think there are 3-4 things needed, and this builds on the example Joy mentioned of the Rainbow Drive in Bangalore, and I'll elaborate that. First step we need is awareness of what the impacts of our lifestyles are. So if cities are used to getting X amount of urban Lutyens Delhi is what, 250?
More, yeah, around 250
How much,
liters or
whatever your
something, yeah.
per capita water
Yeah.
availability is and expectation is, or power, or any other such thing that we use. Most of us don't even know what the impacts of that are. Where is it coming from? Who is it affecting? What is it affecting, right? So creating that awareness, which then creates, at least in some people, the questioning, oh, if I'm having this impact on that place, maybe I should do something to change my lifestyle a little bit so that it can be different. This was the question that residents in Rainbow Drive in Bangalore asked themselves. Some residents, not all, some residents asked themselves saying, why should Bangalore, first of all, why should we be actually boring down 800 meters into the soil to get water? It's now gone to 1200 meters apparently. Secondly, if not that, why should we be getting water from somewhere outside Bangalore where depriving villagers of the water and us getting it? So there were a few individuals in Rainbow Drive who started asking these questions, and then they started looking at solutions. How do we become self-sufficient, at least in water? And now they're also talking about energy. So that first of all, we don't deplete the groundwater. Secondly, we don't deprive somebody else outside for our needs. So they got into solutions like much more rainwater harvesting and recycling and so on. They're also now beginning to talk about how we can use less water in some of what we do, like the flushes and things like that. So that's one way of looking at it. That how do you? Bhuj is another very interesting example. Bhuj in Kutch, where 5 or 6 organizations have been working with the urban residents in Bhuj, saying how do we become self-sufficient in water and housing also. Especially in poor colonies. Now, 4 slums there, for instance, are already 100% water self-sufficient. They just tap the rainwater, and mind you, this is India's lowest rainfall area, 250 millimeters of rainfall. Tap the rainwater so well and manage it so well that they have enough water through the year. So they don't even actually depend on civic societies, forget about depending on an outside village kind of thing. So that's one whole set of things, making yourself more aware and then taking the actions to actually make yourself more self-sufficient. The second set of now how did all these things happen? Because people actually did create that sense of community. Now in the case of Rainbow Drive, it's a little bit more settled community, there are residents, but even there are people going back and forth. There are migratory families also, but there's a core of residents who kind of started building up through the neighborhood association, building up more of a community spirit. Most of our cities, there are, at least most of the colonies, there are some either neighborhood associations or resident welfare associations or something or the other. Unfortunately, most of them don't take up these issues. They take up other kinds of stuff, or they'll do Diwali melas and Holi and things like that. But issues of their ecological impact and so on are not taken up. But these are good places where you can do that. In Pune, another thing that's happened now is a number of residents associations are actually doing what they call participatory budgeting. So they are saying, why should the budget of the city be decided only by bureaucrats and politicians? Finally, the budgets are meant for us. So why shouldn't we as residents and citizens actually be designing the budget ourselves? So it's a process of sort of bottom-up budgeting for the city. Still very imperfect, but the beginnings of that. So again, people are saying we need to take more responsibility for our own lives, and we can create the community organizations and spirit in order to do that. It's harder,
Yeah.
but it's possible. There are lots of examples where people have done that. The same thing can happen as you as a college community. For instance, ask is Ambedkar University, how self-sufficient is Ambedkar University in water? Or for instance, ask why should Ambedkar University be using this? No, seriously, I mean this is not, sorry, I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. Incidentally, can I get some water which is not bottled?
I will have.
Yes, thanks. So you're also a community, you're also a community of students and teachers and administrators. It could be that. You also have virtual communities. The community can be defined in many different ways, but you can actually create collectives even in urban situations which are able to deal with some of these issues. Thanks.
And the other issue is that, see, the way the urban settlement is organized today, I think one of the logical catalysts is to increase in distance between your place of livelihood or workspace and your living space. Now, the issue is that you can build up a community of a different type if you can decrease the distance between where you work and live. That has got a lot of impacts on type of thing, and you have better, then there's an incentive to conserve, recycle and various other type of thing, because you have a different type of community sense there. Today it is all atomized. Your workspace is somewhere else, that type of community is very different. You come back to live maybe about 50 kilometers distant from your thing. You don't even meet each other. All the housing colonies associations are non-functional to some extent.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of different type of ethos today, the way the urban city life is organized, life and work and things. So probably in the long term, we need to reconceptualize things differently for cities.
And just additionally, because even after doing all that, not all the needs will be met in the city.
Yeah.
It's the nature of the city.
Yeah.
So then you build relationships with your surrounding countryside, the villages. For instance, now increasingly there are relationships between urban consumers who want organic food and farmers who are producing.
Direct,
Direct relationships, not through retail and so on. Direct relationships where you actually know the farmer who's producing your food. You can even visit that farmer.
Yeah.
You can help, volunteer to do some labor there. Also, the farmer can visit you in your house, and you build up that relationship, which means that you're not then growing your own food, but you know who's growing it, and you build a relationship in which that person is also benefiting because you're directly paying them. So you can do that. That is also happening more and more. But also you can do urban farming. I mean, is it Havana which produces a substantial part of its own? So increasingly, there's Bangalore has 25,000 households that are doing rooftop gardening,
city farming.
city farming. So there's many different ways in which one can do it, but you need to create that collective spirit and mobilization in order to do it. As individuals, it's very hard to actually work on this. You can change your own lifestyle to some extent, but that's limited.
But in these modern systems, I'm talking about this modern system as cities. So in these modern systems, I don't think that anything is totally local.
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
you are talking about this roof gardening thing. That is also not completely local because water is coming from somewhere else.
No, but water could come from your own thing.
But that's the
But
thing,
but a person who is living in a 25 square feet house,
Cannot do it.
they cannot do it.
Yes, but that's why the importance of the collective. No? So, for instance, let's say the slum in Bhuj, individually, none of those families would be able to become self-sufficient. But 30 households together have managed to actually have a well in a part of their thing and managed to harvest the rainfall and have a water management committee which makes sure that nobody is misusing, overusing that water, so that water is there for everybody. So that's the importance of the collective. The whole building or the whole colony or that's the scale at which you'd have to do some of these things, or even larger, 3 colonies together or whatever, something like that.
And also the recycled water can be used for the type of gardening. Today the problem is that drinking quality of water is even given to sanitary or the toilet purposes.
And washing cars.
Yeah, washing carts and private swimming pools and this. So unless you make a disaggregate, what is this whole water going into domestic water? Saying that there is a lifeline component and that should be ensured to everybody a high quality water. The rest of the water need to come from your recycled or sewerage treatment and various other type of things. Today don't make such a distinctions. And under the name of priority for domestic water, farmers are denied because you want to supply 250 liters per person into Delhi and Pune and things. But why can't you do it 30 liters or 40 liters? And there are studies to show that even 25 liters is the type of range. in which a lifeline water can be done, and the rest of the new needs can be met through even lower quality or recycled other type of waters. But we don't make such distinctions.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he had something. He has been.
And Rohit also.
I just actually wanted to know about, so see Maharashtra, since both of you have worked and live in Maharashtra, something about Maharashtra. So the three sorts of things that we hear about it, one is of course the urban expansion in Mumbai and Pune and so on. The second is this sort of manufacturing and industrial development, which you alluded to a little bit. And third, of course, is the agricultural crisis and so on. I'm just wondering how these three things fit together, and how do you see this changing in the near future, or where is it leading to in the near future? Sort of complex.
Joy is much more of a Maharashtrian than I am.
Related.
You.
There is time.
Acha. You want to go?
No, you
I mean, see, Maharashtra is also a bit of a contradiction in the sense that Maharashtra is slowly moving into like an urban in terms of population. This I think maybe another 5 to 10 years we'll have more of an urban dwellers than rural. I think Tamil Nadu is already more than 50% I think urbanized and things. Now, in fact, in Maharashtra, if you see the whole political economy of Maharashtra to some extent, there was a conceptualization when Yashwantara Chavan was the chief minister, something called moving towards an agro-industrial society. Saying that agriculture per se probably may not be able to meet people's livelihood, so you need some type of processing and industrialization which to take place based on your agriculture system, that's the base. Now, unfortunately in Maharashtra, because of the whole political economy and the sugar dominated type of thing, that whole base of agro-industrial development got restricted or limited to only sugar. Sugarcane processing, that became the seat of power and various other. So they never expand to other agriculture produce or other type of things. So, in fact, that is reflected in many other things. But see, the whole 2003 water policy of Maharashtra came up saying that the second priority should be for industry. It was not an accident. It was also part of this whole design, saying that we are moving towards an industrial society or urban type of thing. So probably it should this. If you look at the way the SEZs have come up and various other type of things, that is very clear. But there is a rethinking about that. I mean, there could be a different type of agro-industrial society which is possible, which need not be that type of centralized industries or centralized urban type of a thing. There are people who have been working with a different type of conceptualization. For example, people like us also talking about decentralized biomass-based, energy self-reliant industrialization to some extent. There is a different pathway which at least at conceptualization and some of the components have been experimented. I'm not saying that it's all been brought together as an integrated unit of type of thing, but there's a different conceptualization which is possible. But then you have grassroots movement which question some of this, whether it is water allocation, the type of land use which is being taking place. In fact, Maharashtra has been also demanding that the whole land ceiling, which is there to be now taken out completely, so that industries and other type of things that come up. So it's a larger question which is there, but there are certain other articulations which is coming up saying that there are different type of agro-industrial society is possible. In fact, one example I can give you is that maybe in the late 90s, in fact, this Vasantha sugar factory, which is one of the largest crushing factory in Maharashtra in Sangli district, all of a sudden people shifted to soybean. Now there are two things for that. One is that soybean had a very much more price stability that time, and there are people went for processing of soybean to some extent. So it created a different type of value addition chain and things. Now villages where they used to cultivate sugarcane, they shifted to soybean in a great manner, and the directors of the sugar factory have to go and take meetings in each of the villages. You come back to sugarcane, we'll give you another 500 rupees per ton as additional type of a thing. So see, people also look for different options and things. But the problem, the way the technology development takes place, value addition or processing facilities are there. So farmers are also caught in a bind. They also know that there are much better remunerative crops which is available, but which is not possible because the whole political economy is centered around to some extent some of these crops and things. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the example of Uttambakkam, we have a case study which we can send you near Chennai, is one which Joy is talking about. So it's an agro-industrial base where this Dalit Sarpanch called Ilango actually managed to use the panchayat funds which are normally available, normally get siphoned off, to create local decentralized manufacturing units which now employ 200 or 250 families, mostly Dalits in fact, who used to or who would have otherwise had to go to Chennai to find work. So it's a model where outmigration actually is significantly reduced or stopped, or in fact in some cases even reversed. Jharcraft in Jharkhand is another interesting example, a state government unit which has promoted 20 different traditional crafts in such a way that village economies have significantly improved. And I went to some villages where in fact people have come back after having gone to Ranchi. They've actually come back to because they have good employment in the village itself. So I think these are the sorts of things where there are some examples available which, if policy supports them, would go much further in at least reducing the scale and the problem of urbanization that we have.
Yeah. Waste
Yeah,
segregation.
either of you. Yeah, yes.
So like if you want to do waste in management of waste, you segregate the waste and everything on a small scale level without it actually eventually going to the yard and burning down. How do you actually manage to make that happen? Because I remember for the smallest time we were trying to do that in college, like we were trying to segregate waste and remove like stuff that could be recycled and which was non-biodegradable and biodegradable separately, but eventually it just went to the same thing.
Yeah.
So
Actually Pune is a very good example where both is happening.
Yeah.
So where Swachh KKPK, what I spoke about, the Waste Picker Women's Collective, where they are operating, they not only ensure, they will only pick up your garbage if you have done the segregation, first of all. Once they have collected it, they keep it segregated and they then take the waste to, they have these sorting depots, which they had to struggle a lot for the administration to give them, but they have 2 or 3 sorting depots, where they will then further segregate the waste into some 18, 20 different
what
kinds.
was again? Sorry?
Sorting depots, so just sorting the waste, sorting. They'll segregate it into 18, 20 different kinds of waste, and then those are sold off to people who will do the recycling. So people will come and actually buy it from them. The wet waste goes into compost and into one energy production unit is there.
There in Pune.
Yeah. So that's an example. Part of Pune, unfortunately, is also given to a corporate entity, and Pimpri Chinchwad, which is the twin city of Pune, is also given to a corporate entity, which does what you're saying.
Yeah.
They will collect it, segregate it, and then dump it all together
Yeah.
into open.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's stupid.
And this
But that's how they make profits.
I also don't know about this zero waste system that some come out. No,
See, zero waste का मतलब ये है कि it's not, unfortunately, it doesn't mean that no waste comes out at all,
Yeah.
which would be ideal. But it means that wet waste is going to be treated within your own system. You create a composting or whatever other facility, and you will make sure that the other waste is segregated in such a way that it's done exactly what Swachh people do.
Yeah.
That it's given to different
Okay.
Nothing goes to the
recyclers.
landfill.
Huh?
Nothing will go to the landfill.
Yeah.
That's zero waste.
But then, like,
Everything will get
hazardous-
recycled.
Hazardous waste, what happens to that eventually?
No, so that's why you need to ask more fundamental questions of what in the first place we are producing.
Yeah.
That's where you cannot deal with it in a recycling sense. You have to start asking, should these sorts of things be produced in the first
In
place or
fact,
not? And where you might have some, like, computers, if you think they're necessary, they will create electronic
and
waste.
also sometimes things conflict. Now, for example, for energy efficiency, now LED bulbs are being promoted and subsidized and things, but nobody knows what to do with that LED type, unless you have a collection center, get it back, centrally or the type, because otherwise it goes into, because there's I think mercury content or some of those.
CFL has mercury. LED also has some.
Hazardous things. So issue is that actually there's a rule. I think the seller is supposed to collect back.
Yeah.
Once the life is over and things, but that systems are not actually
Even with
working.
batteries,
So-
they're not in place.
So from an efficiency consideration, yes, it saves energy. But then what happens to that later, it becomes a much more serious problem.
Well, India is becoming a colonial power, so I think we'll start exporting our
Waste into other countries.
Right now we're importing it, but
Yes.
so obviously that's not a solution. But
What would your take be on waste to energy plants? Who promised to sort of
they're seriously problematic from many points of view. The conversion rates are actually very poor. Some people, I haven't looked at it in detail, but some people tell me that actually the energy spent in doing the thing is more in somewhat hidden ways than what you're producing. They create enormous amounts of pollution, air pollution especially.
At least if you burn it.
Yeah.
But there are also biodigesters now,
okay,
which
so
you
that's-
can use to
Landfill
digest and get it.
Yes, but those will not. Those will be for wet waste mostly.
Wet waste,
Wet
wet
waste.
waste, yeah.
But if you're trying to do that for other
Yeah.
non-wet waste, then it's enormously polluting.
So you would say that this is another kind of a technique fix which is...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's enormous profits again.
Sarah.
I think we should,
I think end with his,
Yeah.
his hand has been.
Okay, please. We have all the time, but I think you are constrained for time. So there is no issue.
I thought you had.
No, we have a meeting, but
We
that's
have
okay.
slightly flexible. What
Yeah,
time is it?
flexible.
It's,
It's around 4:30 or,
Another
4:25.
10 minutes? please?
yeah, 5-10 minutes, that's, yeah.
Yeah, so talking about the self-sufficiency model, we talked about water and in cities that we can recycle water and whatever. So my question is that how far can this be applicable to other forms of resources that the city uses, like something like electricity, which is almost inevitable to the city and the need is growing by the day. And not only that, the government also proposes to supply electricity to most the remotest of the villages. That means the amount of electricity that needs to be produced has to be at an industrial level. And for that to happen, you need to have lands that are dedicated to power generation. You need to give lands to industries that generate power, and that would eventually lead to the dilemma that we were talking about, that people in the remote areas, they're losing their land or not getting water. So what is your take on that? As in, how far is the self-sufficiency model actually applicable in the current situation?
So see, for cities, it's obviously a bit more difficult to answer than for villages. It's fairly simple in terms of, at least in theory, what is possible and actually what has happened also in some places. But for cities, it is more difficult because the concentrations of energy requirement are much higher than in a village. But Delhi, if I'm not mistaken, has actually now just started talking about rooftop solar. According to, I think, what Greenpeace calculation was, that 25 to 30% of domestic needs, power needs in Delhi could be met by. That's also enormous land, right?
Yeah.
It's not land on the ground, but it's enormous surface.
That's still 30%, right?
Yeah. But I mean,
And
that's
the demand is growing by the day. So
so that's the second part, which is the more difficult one, because this is again a technological solution. The second part, which is more difficult, is how much of your demand is justified.
So that's the thing.
So you'll have to. I mean, there is no other way. Analysts who have looked at it saying that you can convert all of the coal and all of the nuclear and the therm and the big hydro into solar and wind. The impacts of that at this scale will still be ecologically unsustainable, right? So therefore, the scale of demand has to actually come down,
So
especially in cities, and which means we have to start questioning lifestyles.
Yeah, exactly.
Of
So
course,
are
absolutely. I mean, when we did college, we never had air conditioners.
Yeah, so
In
that's
fact,
the thing. Are we-
just-
So seriously, and I'm still alive, right? I mean, nothing has happened.
Just to add to it, in
So-
fact, there is also the work of people like Amulya Kumar Reddy and things who have done integrated energy planning, in which demand side management is one of the important components. Second is the whole question of even increasing efficiency. I think there are softer options than going for capacity, increase in things. I think the losses and thefts together comes to something like, which is broadly accounted as TNB transmission losses or distribution losses, about 30 to 40% in water as well as in energy. So if you can look into some of these issues, then probably the demand itself can be, without going for new generation and other decentralized renewable energy options which have come now quite matured in India, where it is much competitive to go for that type of systems, whether it is solar or wind or small hydro systems and other type of things, which can be much more sustainable options and things.
So, and these hard questions will only be asked when more and more people's movements actually start questioning our lifestyles and our demands.
But that's the thing, like, even if you try and tell people, like, I remember when I was in 5th grade, we did this Stunky Trooper thing, and we went around to every house in our locality, and we told them that your liter, not even the fact that, they had meter, you have water meters that they're supposed to tell you when your water is filled to the tank. There were people who refused to actually shut the water still. So we went around banging, and we 5th graders, we went around banging people's houses and saying, shut your meter, shut your water from running. But there were people and I'm now I'm in college and I go around, behind my colleagues and I still see water leaking like that. And it's ridiculous because it's not even water at any level, it's just being wasted for no reason whatsoever. It goes down in the asphalt and gets
Yeah.
There is somebody behind, he has not asked, probably then you will get next. Yeah. Bolo?
Ashish, this is a very nostalgic moment for me.
Oh.
Because it was in 1997 that you came for the World Wide Fund for lecture to me, and I was doing a course at that time. and you came for 3 lectures, and from that time onwards, I think it's about 20 years that we're meeting. I'm meeting physically, and you haven't changed in your.
What, physically?
Slightly healthy.
Slightly
So,
healthy.
what I observe and appreciate in your work is you talk about alternatives, but you talk about the alternatives of the same issue. You haven't changed your perspective. You speak the same thing. You have the same criticism that I really appreciate. And the second one is a suggestion. It might have already been covered in the talk, but what I could not get it, but should be there in your framework. You talk about the 5 things. So one is about the environmental justice. I think it should be incorporated. The second one is the something like rational ecological transparency, meaning when we talk about the foreign countries, they are selling something in our country or in our village, we talk about the same self-reliance and so on and so forth. What about those particular Dalit farmers working in the Telangana or the Andhra Pradesh started their selling their products in northeastern India, or for that matter in some other parts of the country? Will not be talking about the self-reliance or is something like exotic. So what I want to say is there is nothing wrong in bringing and introducing or accessing the market which is not native friendly. The only thing is that we should be transparent enough. How are you producing it? Why are you producing it? What are the pros and cons? So there is nothing wrong in accepting a goods coming from some other countries, provided it is very transparent and clear to purchase. So I think this suggestion might have already been there in you, but I was not. Okay.
See, what I would do is, no, I mean, I didn't, because of the shortage of time. There's a lot of simplicism that gets built into the presentations that we have to make. You're right, but I would agree and disagree. Let me put it like this. I would agree, as we've already said, that there are certain, beyond basic needs, there are a lot of things that you could be exchanging and trading, etc. Right? But I think that needs to be based on very core principles. So, principle number 1, and again, not any hierarchy and such. Principle number 1, whatever you're trading is not impacting the ecological sustainability of whether those who are consuming or those who are producing. That's one of those areas. Secondly, it's fair trade in the sense that there is equity built into the trade itself. People who are producing are getting the price that they should be getting, and as consumer, you're paying the price that you should be paying. And ideally, that can happen much better when you have a closer relationship, face to face. It's harder and harder the longer the distance, because there are that many more traders and retailers involved who are making the profits in the middle. So that's why again distance becomes, both geographic and other kinds of distances become important. But it's possible to do it through fair trade, for instance, as a logo is something which tries to do this even when there's international trade involved. But beyond that, see, if one doesn't adhere to those principles, the danger is that, let's say the Deccan Development Society women who are producing organic jawar and in Telangana and you in Delhi are buying it, it is right now seems to be a fair trade because they're setting the price, you're paying for it. As a conscious consumer, you want to buy it and you want to support what they're doing, fine. But supposing tomorrow, as a long distance consumer, you find, oh, instead of this, there's something else I want to go into, or some other product I want to go into, their security of security of economic livelihood actually gets threatened. Because there's very little influence that they have. They cannot come 2,000 kilometers to you and say, hey, listen, why did you do this? Please keep buying from me. Which they can if the consumer or most of the consumers were 20 kilometers away or 30 kilometers away or 50 kilometers away. So, that relationship of one of trust, but secondly also of the ability to determine my own life gets, the possibility of undermining that is higher the longer the distance of the economic relationship. That doesn't mean it always will be like that, but it becomes that much more fragile, let's say. So which is why we then argue that at least for basic needs, localization. Beyond that, yes, a lot of trade is possible.
And also the energy cost involved.
The energy cost, the food miles, all that.
One additional viewer to the making of dance and notice. I have been told that it is also because of controlling the terrorist activity. It has become a hub of centers of training. So if you make a big dam, there will be a lot of clearing of forests. Those people who are hiding there will be out. That is another view, but I really don't subscribe to it.
There was a chief minister of Madhya Pradesh who argued that all of Bastar's forest should be cut down so that all the Naxalites would be exposed. So, yeah, these are real life arguments people give.
Okay.
I think E just last comment I will finish. Yeah.
Sir, when we talk about solutions, like you talked about solar panels in every house in cities. So, is that really a mechanism to give solution? Because a solar panel also leads to some kind of pollution.
Yeah.
So it's just a proxy of like in the form of solution.
No,
And-
so no, I understand totally what you're saying. Every human activity is going to have some impact. So either we say human beings should kind of withdraw from the earth, which is an interesting way of looking at it. I'm not making this as I'm actually serious. There are some people who argue that human beings should actually become extinct so that the rest of creation or rest of nature can survive. But that leaving that aside, if human beings continue, we will have some impact. What we need to figure out is what is the minimal impact that we can have. So, in the current scheme of things, it seems that decentralized solar is likely to have a much lesser impact than centralized thermal, for instance, or centralized nuclear. One. But like I said earlier, even with that, unless we start questioning the amount of demand we're making, we're all in serious trouble, even if we shift to 100% solar. So we have to reduce the demand also. And that's how we then minimize our impacts.
The footprint.
But that has not yet taken place. The
It hasn't,
100% solar panel thing has not taken yet place yet. So how we can say that this will have lesser impact, and because we don't have the.
Oh no, those calculations are available.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you can do the calculations, how much minerals will you need, what's the water you need for producing that electricity, etc., etc., for solar, versus let's say for thermal, versus for nuclear, versus for something else. Those are very easily available. Many people have done that kind of work. And at least as far as I know, the consensus amongst those who are genuinely interested in this and not who are vested interests is that solar and wind, decentralized, would be much less ecologically impacting than thermal, nuclear, and the current dirty sources. So-called.
Okay. Oh, thanks a lot for coming here. And whenever you come to Delhi, do let us know. The other way you can actually still catch them and is to work under their supervision during your summer internship. Just get after them, and I'm sure they have enough opportunities in the organization.
Okay, I'm putting my email, and I think Joy, you can. Yeah. So please send a mail. Both Joy and I promise to respond.